A rich man's son viciously kicked a helpless German shepherd, a cruel act meant to break the spirit of its loving owner. She was the last person standing in his powerful father's way, the final obstacle in a corrupt plan to seize the entire town. They thought she was alone, that she would be easily broken, but what the bully didn't know was that a Navy SEAL seeking peace from war was watching from the shadows. Now he was about to unleash a storm of justice that would change their town forever. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The air in Port Blossom, Washington tasted of salt and pine, a raw, clean scent that did little to wash away the memories Wyatt Nelson was trying to leave behind. A persistent gray mist clung to the coastline, softening the edges of the rugged cliffs and blurring the line between the churning sea and the heavy sky. For a Navy SEAL on a rare 30-day leave, this quiet, moody town was supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where the only orders came from the tide, and the only conflicts were the squabbles of gulls over a discarded crab shell. Wyatt Nelson, a man built of quiet intensity and disciplined muscle, walked with a purpose that seemed out of place on the town's sleepy main street. In his mid-30s, his features were sharp, carved by sun and stress, and his short-cropped brown hair did nothing to hide the vigilance in his eyes. He was trying to slow down to match the unhurried rhythm of the fishing boats bobbing in the harbor. But years of training had hardwired him for observation. He saw everything: the faint cracks in the sidewalk, the slow peel of paint on the historic storefronts, the way the locals nodded to each other with a familiarity born of shared geography and shared secrets. It was that ingrained awareness that made him stop ahead, outside a modest building with a faded wooden sign that read Port Blossom Veterinary Clinic. A scene was unfolding that was decidedly out of sync. With the town's peaceful facade, a young man, probably in his early 20s, stood with an arrogant posture that his expensive city slick clothes couldn't quite support. This was Trent Finch. Though Wyatt didn't yet know his name, he was all sharp angles and restless energy, his face twisted into a sneer of entitlement. Facing him was a woman whose stance was a mixture of defiance and weariness. Dr. Cassie Reed, the town veterinarian, had her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her simple jeans and fleece vest were stained with the honest marks of her profession. In her late 20s, her face was framed with a kindness that was currently being overshadowed by a fierce protective resolve between them. Standing as a loyal guardian was a magnificent German shepherd. The dog Kodiak wasn't barking aggressively, but stood firm, a low warning rumble vibrating deep in his chest. His posture was a clear message this far and no further. "I'm not going to tell you." Again, Reed Trent's voice was sharp. Cutting through the damp air, my father made a generous offer, the most generous. "You're going to get this entire block is coming down, and your little pet hospital isn't going to stand in the way of progress." Cassie crossed her arms, her jaw set. "This isn't just a pet hospital, Trent. It's my home. It was my father's before me, and it's not for sale now. I've asked you to leave my property." Trent laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Property, this dump my father is trying to turn this rundown town into a destination, and you're standing in the way because of sentimentality." He took a menacing step forward. Kodiak mirrored the movement, planting his paws more firmly on the ground, the rumble in his chest growing louder. "Get that mutt under control before I do it for you." Trent snarled, his eyes fixing on the dog. "With malice, he is under control." Cassie shot back her hand, resting reassuringly on Kodiak's powerful shoulders. "He just doesn't like bullies," that was the spark. Trent's entire demeanor shifted from Miragi, ant condescension to raw anger. The insult hit its mark. "You think you're clever?" he spat. He lunged forward, not at Cassie, but at the dog. His boot swung out in a vicious, unexpected kick that caught Kodiak hard in the ribs. The dog yelped a sharp cry of pain and surprise, stumbling sideways for Wyatt. The world snapped into focus. The mist, the gulls, the scent of the sea, it all faded away. There was only the threat and the target. He had seen senseless cruelty in war zones across the globe, but seeing it here, on a quiet street, against a defenseless animal, ignited a cold, controlled fury. Within him he moved. There was no sound, no warning. One moment he was a bystander, 30 feet away the next. He was a silent force of nature. Trent was still snarling at the wounded dog when a hand clamped down on his shoulder. It wasn't a grab. It was an anchor rooting him to the spot with an impossible weight. Trent spun around his face, a mask of fury. Who the hell are his words died in his throat. He was looking at Wyatt, whose expression was utterly calm, almost placid, but his eyes were like chips of ice holding a depth of danger that Trent's sheltered life had never prepared him for. "You need to leave?" Wyatt said. His voice was low, devoid of emotion, yet it carried more authority than a shout. Trent, fueled by ego, tried to shake off the grip. It was like trying to shrug off a mountain. Wyatt's fingers didn't tighten. They simply held a demonstration of effortless power. "Get your hands off me. Do you know who my father is? I don't care." Wyatt replied, his voice still level. He applied a whisper of pressure to a nerve point in Trent's shoulder. It wasn't enough to cause serious pain, just a sudden shocking weakness that made Trent's knees buckle slightly. "You laid your hands on her dog. You will not do it again. You will turn around and you will walk away." Now humiliation and fear warred in Trent's eyes. He had built his identity on the power of his father's name, but that name was useless. Here he was facing something prizy. Mal, something he didn't understand, defeated. He spat on the ground near Wyatt's feet. "This isn't over. My father will hear about this." Wyatt released him. The sudden freedom made Trent stumble back. With one last hateful glare at Cassie and a nervous glance at Wyatt, he turned and stalked off down the EC street, his expensive jacket looking ridiculous on his retreating frame. The sudden silence was heavy. Wyatt's focus immediately shifted. The ice in his eyes melted, replaced by a calm concern. He turned to Cassie, who was kneeling beside Kodiak, her hands gently running over his side. The dog was whining softly, favoring his left front leg. "Is he okay?" Wyatt asked, his voice now gentle. Cassie looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and gratitude. She hadn't even seen where he had come from. "I think so. He took a hard hit. I need to get him inside. Check for broken ribs." She tried to help Kodiak to his feet, but the dog whimpered and struggled to put weight on his leg here. Wyatt said, kneeling beside her, "Let me." He spoke softly to the dog, letting Kodiak sniff the back of his hand. There was an innate understanding in his movements, a quiet confidence that animals seemed to sense. Kodiak, despite his pain, looked at Wyatt and gave a small lick to his fingers. "Okay, boy," Wyatt murmured. "Let's get you looked at." With a practiced ease that surprised Cassie, Wyatt carefully maneuvered his arms under the large dog, supporting his weight and lifting him as if he were a fraction of his size. He stood holding the 75-pound German Shepherd securely against his chest. Cassie scrambled to her feet and rushed to open the clinic door, the little bell above it. Chiming softly, "This way, the exam room is just to the left." Wyatt carried Kodiak inside, into a space that smelled of antiseptic, clean linens, and the faint, comforting scent of animals. He gently placed the dog on the cool steel of the examination table. Kodiak immediately looked to Cassie, his tail giving a weak, uncertain thump against the metal Cassie's. Professionalism took over her hands, moving with practiced skill as she began her examination. "Thank you," she said, her focus entirely on her dog. "I don't know what I would have. He just came out of nowhere. He's a bully," Wyatt said, simply watching from the doorway, giving them space. They count on people being afraid to step in. She looked up from palpating Kodiak's ribs, meeting his eyes for the first time, without the filter of adrenaline. Still not many would have, especially not against a Finch. She paused, her hand still on her loyal friend. "I'm Cassie Reed, Wyatt Nelson," he replied. A moment of understanding passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the violence that had just shattered the peace of their afternoon. Outside, the Port Blossom mist thickened, wrapping the small clinic in a shroud of gray, hiding it from the world. But both of them knew the threat hadn't vanished. It had only retreated into the fog. Waiting 2 days past the persistent coastal drizzle finally broke, allowing a pale, watery sunlight to filter through the clouds, making the wet streets of Port Blossom gleam. For Wyatt, the quiet had become a low hum of anticipation. His leave was meant to be an exercise in decompression, but his instincts, honed by years operating in the world's most dangerous environments, were now fully awake. He found himself walking the short distance from his rented beachfront cabin to the veterinary clinic each morning under the pretense of checking on the town's newest patient. He pushed open the door, the familiar bell announcing his arrival. The clinic was quiet. The mid-morning lull between emergency calls and scheduled appointments. Cassie was at the front desk typing notes into a computer, a frown of concentration on her face. She looked tired. There were faint shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before. At the sound of the bell, a deep, happy woof echoed from the back. A moment later, Kodiak limped into the reception area, his tail wagging in a wide, hopeful arc, he was still. Tender, but the pained yelp was gone, replaced by an enthusiastic welcome. He nudged his head firmly into Wyatt's hand, leaning his weight against his leg in a gesture of complete trust. "Looks like someone's feeling better," Wyatt said, scratching the dog behind the ears. Cassie's frown softened into a genuine smile as she watched them. "He's a fast healer. The bruising is going down, and thankfully nothing was broken, just deep tissue trauma." She rose from her chair. "Can I get you some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. I'd like that." Wyatt accepted, following her into a small break room behind the counter. The space was cozy and lived in a stark contrast to the sterile examination rooms. Photos were taped to the refrigerator, a younger Cassie with her parents, various smiling clients with their pets, and dozens of pictures of Kodiak as a clumsy, adorable puppy. She handed him a heavy ceramic mug. "You don't have to keep checking on him, you know, but thank you. It's nice to know someone has our back." "It's no trouble," Wyatt said, leaning against the counter. "My cabin gets quiet." He decided to probe gently. "I had breakfast at the diner on the pier this morning," spoke to the owner. Cassie's expression became guarded. "Silas, that's the one?" Wyatt confirmed he recalled the man clearly. Silas Croft, a man in his 70s with hands as gnarled as old rope and eyes that seemed to have watched 70 years of tides come and go. He ran the town's unofficial information hub with a quiet, observant wisdom. "Silas has a lot of opinions," Cassie said, carefully pouring her own coffee. "He said Alistair Finch is changing this town." Wyatt continued, watching her reaction. "That his company Aegis Development is buying up the whole waterfront. Some people think it's progress." Silas called it an invasion. Cassie let out a long, weary sigh, the fight momentarily draining from her. She leaned against the opposite counter, her mug cradled in her hands. "Silas is right. It is an invasion, a slow, methodical one." She finally opened up, her voice low and steady. This clinic, it was my dad's. He built it himself, board by board, 30 years ago. He was the only vet in this town for most of that time. When he passed away 2 years ago, I took over. It's all I have left of him. It's my legacy." Her eyes drifted to the photos on the fridge. Alistair Finch showed up about a year ago. At first, it was all smiles and promises. He wanted to revitalize Port Blossom, build a luxury resort, bring in tourist money. A lot of folks bought into it. He made generous offers, and one by one, the other businesses on this block sold. The bait shop, the old cannery office, the bookshop, all gone, but you didn't sell. Wyatt stated I couldn't. She said, her voice tightening. "He offered me 3 times what this place is worth. I said no, then the offer stopped and the problems started." "What kind of problems?" "Subtle things. At first, anonymous complaints filed with the county about sanitation. Even though my clinic has a perfect record, a building inspector showing up claiming there are code violations in a building that has stood for 3 decades without a single issue. My main medical supplier suddenly terminated our contract. No explanation given. I had to scramble to find another one 100 miles away. It's death by 1,000 cuts. He's trying to make it impossible for me to stay in business, to force me out." Wyatt listened, his expression unreadable. He had seen these tactics before in different countries on a much larger scale. It was a form of siege warfare designed to break an opponent's will without firing a shot. "And Trent?" he asked. Cassie's gaze hardened. "Trent is his father's blunt instrument. Whenever Alistair wants to send a clearer message, he sends his son. Trent has been here 6 times, each time more arrogant than the last. But he never got physical." Before she looked past Wyatt, her eyes finding Kodiak, who was now lying on the cool tile floor, watching them intently. That wasn't just Trent being a spoiled brat, throwing a tantrum. "Wyatt," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "K. Icking my dog right in front of my clinic in broad daylight. That was the message. It was a warning straight from his father." A silence settled over the small room. Thick with the weight of her words, Wyatt took a slow sip of his coffee. The warmth of the mug did little to ward off the chill that had entered the conversation. He had come to Port Blossom seeking peace, a temporary escape from a world of calculated violence and hidden threats, but it seemed that world had followed him here, hiding behind the face of progress and the developer's smile. He looked from Cassie's determined, tired face to the loyal dog resting on the floor. His 30-day leave was no longer about rest. It was about to become a mission. The night pressed in on Port Blossom, heavy and starless. A thick blanket of fog rolled in from the Pacific, swallowing the moonlight and muffling the sound of the distant waves. It was a night for secrets, for things that thrived in the damp and the dark inside the clinic. Cassie Reed locked the front door, the familiar click of the deadbolt, doing little to soothe the unease that had settled in her heart. Kodiak lay on his bed behind the counter, his head on his paws, but his eyes were open and alert. He watched Cassie's every move, sensing her anxiety. Every creak of the old building, every scuttling sound from the alley outside made his ears twitch. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, stroking his head. "We're safe in here." She didn't know how wrong she was. Hours later, long after the last light in town had been extinguished, a dark SUV with its headlights off crept to a stop down the street. 3 figures emerged, moving with the clumsy swagger of young men trying to project a toughness they didn't truly possess. Trent Finch LED the way a crowbar clutched in his hand. His 2 companions were shadows, their faces obscured by hoodies, their purpose clear only in the malice of their silence. There was no sound at first, just the faint scrape of metal against a window lock. They slipped into the alley beside the clinic. The first crash was the loudest, the sound of the back window shattering the glass, falling like sharp crystalline rain onto the floor of the supply room. Kodiak was on his feet in an instant, a deep, ferocious bark ripping through the silence. The figures inside froze, but Trent just laughed a low, cruel sound. He's locked in the front. Come on. They moved with vindictive purpose. This wasn't a robbery, it was a violation. They overturned shelves of medical supplies, smashed equipment, and ripped open bags of pet food, scattering the contents across the floor. But their true message was delivered in spray paint on the clean white wall of the main exam room. They scrawled in dripping red letters, "Sell or swim," and on the front door a more personal, vicious threat. Next time it's the dog, they were gone as silently as they had come, melting back into the fog-choked night, leaving behind a scene of calculated chaos. The next morning, the sun fought a losing battle with the fog. Cassie arrived at her usual time, her coffee mug in hand. She saw it from the street. The hateful red letters scrawled across her front door. Her breath caught her stomach, twisting into a cold knot for a moment. She was frozen, unable to move. Then the fear was eclipsed by a wave of protective fury for the animal inside. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking, and rushed in. Kodiak. He met her in the trashed reception area, whining and pressing against her, unhurt but deeply agitated by the invasion of his home. Cassie knelt, hugging him tightly, her eyes taking in the wreckage, the overturned furniture, the scattered files, the acrid smell of spray paint. It was worse than she could have imagined. This was meant to break her. Tears of anger and helplessness welled in her eyes, and for the first time since her father's passing, she felt truly alone and utterly defeated. That's when the bell above the door chimed softly. Wyatt stood there taking in the scene with an unnerving stillness. He had been on his morning walk well, and now he saw the graffiti. His eyes swept over the destruction, missing nothing, his face a mask of cold control. But inside, the quiet fury from 2 days ago had ignited into a raging inferno. This was no longer a civilian matter. This was an enemy action, an attack on a non-combatant. And in Wyatt Nelson's world, there was only one response to that. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and steady, cutting through her panic. She looked up, swiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "I am fine. Kodiak's fine. But this," her voice broke. "What am I supposed to do, Wyatt? The sheriff will file a report, and nothing will happen. Alistair Finch owns this whole town." Wyatt walked further into the room, his boots crunching softly on spilled kibble. He knelt and ran a hand over Kodiak's back, calming the dog with his steady presence. Then he stood and looked at Cassie, and in that moment she saw the shift. The quiet man on leave was gone. In his place was a soldier, an operator, whose eyes held the cold, clear certainty of a man with a mission. "You're not going to do anything," he said. "You're going to let me make a phone call, then you're going to board up that back window and clean up what you can. You're going to open your clinic tomorrow like nothing happened. You're going to show them they can't scare you, but they have scared me," she whispered. "I know," he said, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "That's why I'm going to handle it." He walked to the corner of the room, away from the broken glass, and pulled out a satellite phone, a rugged piece of equipment that looked completely out of place in the small-town clinic. He dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a gravelly voice answered with a single word. "Go, Vance, it's Nelson." Wyatt said, his tone all business. There was a pause on the other end. Commander Elias Eli Vance was a man who had seen and heard everything. In his 50s, with a mind as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel and the patience of a sniper, he was the strategic head of Wyatt's SEAL team. He trusted at his men implicitly, especially Nelson. "You're on leave." Wyatt Vance's voice crackled through the phone. Don't tell me you found trouble in a fishing town. Trouble found me, Wyatt corrected. I need a workup on a person of interest. Name is Alistair Finch, operating out of Port Blossom, Washington, under the company name Aegis Development. Looks like a standard corporate land grab, but the tactics are getting aggressive. I need to know who he really is. Aggressive, how threats, intimidation, and as of tonight, property destruction, and targeted animal cruelty. There was another pause, longer this time. Vance knew what those words meant to a man like Wyatt. You think it's more than just business? His son attacked a civilian. When I intervened, they retaliated against her property under the cover of darkness. They're cowards, but they're organized. It doesn't feel right. I need to know what's under the rock, all right? Wyatt Vance said, his tone shifting. The full weight of his command was behind his next words. Give me what you have. I'll task the analysts. You'll have a preliminary brief by sundown. And Wyatt, stay smart. You're operating solo. Always am. Wyatt replied and ended the call. He turned back to Cassie. The entire conversation had taken less than 90 seconds, but the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. Hope, fragile but real, began to push back against her despair. She didn't understand who he had called or what it meant, but she understood the quiet promise in his eyes. He was not just a kind stranger, he was a protector. And the storm that Alistair Finch had brought to her doorstep was about to meet a hurricane. Sundown bled across the horizon in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. Wyatt stood on the porch of his small rental cabin watching the waves crash against the shore. He had spent the day with Cassie, helping her board up the broken window and clean the hateful red paint from her walls. They had worked in a comfortable, focused silence, a shared purpose binding them closer than ever. These ever could now. As darkness gathered, the waiting began. His satellite phone, a lifeline to a world far from this quiet town, buzzed on the railing beside him. A single encrypted message had arrived. He carried the phone inside. The cabin was sparse with just a bed, a small kitchen, and a table. He sat, the glow of the screen illuminating the grim set of his features as he read the brief Commander Vance had sent. It was worse than he had imagined. Alistair Finch wasn't his real name. He had been born Anton Vostok, a low-level enforcer for an Eastern European crime syndicate in the 90s. He had vanished after a brutal internal power struggle, resurfacing in America a decade later with a new identity, a clean slate, and a seemingly endless supply of cash. Egypt's development was a classic money laundering front, using large-scale construction projects to wash dirty money until it was clean as sea-bleached bone, but it was the sub-briefs that made the muscles in Wyatt's jaw tighten. The report detailed a pattern along the Pacific Northwest coast, small, economically vulnerable towns, waterfront properties, and a sudden influx of development capital in two other towns. Business owners who had refused to sell had suffered more than just vandalism. One had a mysterious fire, another had simply disappeared. The cases were cold, officially unsolved, but the pattern was undeniable. This wasn't just about building a resort. Port Blossom was a strategic location, its deep water access and isolated coves perfect for smuggling. Finch wasn't just a developer, he was a predator, and Port Blossom was his new hunting ground. The phone buzzed again. This time it was an incoming call from Vance's secure line. Wyatt answered. Talk to me. Nelson Vance's voice was calm, but Wyatt could hear the underlying seriousness. I've read the brief, Wyatt said, his voice flat and cold. This is bigger than a land dispute. Finch or Vostok isn't just washing money. He's setting up a logistics hub smuggling. The resort is a cover for a private port. The analysts agree. Vance confirmed his operation is sophisticated and he's well insulated. Local law enforcement is either underfunded or more likely compromised. Sheriff's department has a budget that doesn't match the town's tax base. Someone's on the payroll. This was the critical point. Wyatt couldn't just hand this over to the local authorities. He was on his own, and he was outgunned. He's escalating, Wyatt said, his gaze drifting out the window toward the distant lights of the town. He's made a direct threat against a civilian doctor. Read he's using his son as an attack dog. They're trying to break her, and they won't stop at vandalism. Based on this file, they're capable of much more. There was a long silence on the line. Vance was weighing the options, calculating the risks. This was not a sanctioned theater of war. This was domestic, messy, and far outside their official mandate. What's your assessment, Wyatt? The threat is credible and immediate. Wyatt stated the words coming out with the precise certainty of a field report. Finch is a ghost with a history of extreme violence. He's established a foothold here, and he will eliminate any obstacle. Dr. Reed is that obstacle. If we wait for the official channels for the FBI to build a case, it will be too late for her. He let the implication hang in the air. He wasn't asking for permission to act. He was stating a fact. Vance sighed, a sound like gravel. Shifting, I can't officially sanction an operation on U.S. soil. Wyatt, I'm not asking for a sanctioned op, Wyatt countered. I'm asking for my team. You told me Phantom was running a maritime training exercise out of Joint Base. Lewis McCord. They are, Vance admitted, advanced insertion and extraction drills in the dark and cold water. Perfect, Wyatt said. This is a deep water port town surrounded by dense forest. It's the perfect environment for a final unscheduled training scenario, a real-world test of their skills. This was the line, the gray area, where rules could be bent for the greater good. Vance knew his man. Wyatt Nelson never asked for help unless it was absolutely necessary. He was the tip of the spear, the one they sent, when failure was not an option. Who do you need? Vance asked, his voice now laced with the quiet authority of a commander who has made his decision. The whole team. Wyatt replied without hesitation. I need Deacon for signals intelligence. We need to know their communications. I need Jester for breaching Finch's properties. We'll be fortified the rest of the team for surveillance and support. He was talking about the men who were more than his colleagues. They were his brothers, David, Deacon Chen, the team's comms and tech wizard, a quiet, slender man whose calm demeanor hid a mind that could crack any encryption and see patterns in digital chaos, and Marco Jester, Rossi the Breacher, a mountain of a man with an easy grin who could be laughing one moment and kicking down a reinforced steel door. The next, they were the best. Phantom is currently 3 hours out by fast boat. Vance said the decision made, they can be off the coast of Port Blossom by Oro 300. This will be an UN-sanctioned non-official training support mission. You are the on-site advisor. There will be no official record. If this goes sideways, you're all on your own. Do you understand, Wyatt? Understood, Commander. Wyatt said. The weight on his shoulders didn't lessen, but it was now a shared burden. Tell them to come in dark. The sea wolves are going hunting. They're on their way. Vance said, and the line went dead. Wyatt stood, a new energy coursing through him. The waiting was over. The fight was coming. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. He had one more stop to make. He found Cassie at the clinic, sweeping the last of the broken glass into a dustpan. Kodiak was at her side, a furry, protective shadow. She looked up as he entered, her expression exhausted but resolute. He didn't tell her everything. He didn't tell her about a man named Vostok or about a team of Navy SEALs currently slicing through the dark waters of the Pacific. He just looked at her, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself a small, reassuring smile. You're not alone in this anymore, Cassie, he said. Help is on the way. A week of deceptive quiet settled over Port Blossom. The boarded-up window at the clinic was replaced, the hateful graffiti was gone, and an uneasy semblance of normality returned. But for Wyatt, the peace was a thin veneer over a waiting battlefield. He spent his days in a state of relaxed vigilance, observing the town's rhythms, noting the vehicles that passed the clinic too frequently. The unfamiliar faces at the diner that didn't belong. He was a ghost hiding in plain sight, his presence a silent promise to Cassie that she was no longer alone. Help was on the way, but it was still a shadow on the horizon. His team Phantom had established a temporary off-the-books observation post in the dense forests north of town. For now they were gathering intelligence, waiting for Finch to make the next move. He made it on a Tuesday. It began not with a threat, but with a plea for help. A pristine black sedan pulled up to the clinic, and a woman rushed in, cradling a small shivering cat in a blanket. She was the picture of distressed elegance. Eleanor Hayes, as she introduced herself, was in her late 40s, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and eyes wide with practiced anxiety. Her designer clothes were a stark contrast to the rugged salt of the earth. Clientele Cassie usually served. Please, Dr. Reed, you have to help her, she pleaded, her voice trembling. This is Luna. She just collapsed. I'm just passing through town, visiting family, and someone at the cafe said you were the best Cassie ever. The professional immediately took the cat, of course. Let's get her inside. Wyatt, who had been in the break room sharing a cup of coffee with Cassie, watched the exchange from a distance. Something about the woman felt off. Her distress seemed a little too polished, her words a little too rehearsed. Cassie took Tidao, he cat into the exam room. She determined it was suffering from severe dehydration and possible toxic ingestion. She administered fluids and an emetic, explaining every step to the overly grateful Mrs. Hayes. Oh, thank you, Eleanor gushed, clutching Cassie's arm. You are a miracle worker. I don't know what I would have done without you. Please send the bill to this address. She handed Cassie a card for a PO box in a town 3 hours away. She paid in cash, declined a follow-up appointment, and hurried out, leaving the now stable cat in Cassie's care for observation. Wyatt's internal alarms were ringing loud and clear. It was too clean, too convenient. The second part of the trap was sprung 2 days later. Cassie was taking Kodiak for a walk along the waterfront, enjoying a rare moment of sunshine. Wyatt was trailing a discreet 50 yards behind as they neared the town's main pier. Trent Finch appeared, flanked by two of his usual cronies. He strode directly into their path, a smug, challenging smirk on his face. Well, look what we have here," Trent said loudly, making sure the few other people on the pier could hear the town vet and her vicious animal. Cassie tightened her grip on Kodiak's leash. "Leave us alone." Kodiak, sensing her tension and recognizing the man who had kicked him, let out a low growl. "See? Unstable," Trent taunted, taking another step closer, deliberately invading their space. A menace, a dog like that shouldn't be allowed in public. He feigned a stumble, lurching directly toward Cassie. It was a classic provocation. Kodiak reacted exactly as any protective dog would. He lunged forward, barking fiercely, straining at the leash to place himself between Cassie and the threat. He didn't bite. He didn't even make contact, but the display was loud and intimidating. "He's out of control. He tried to attack me." Trent yelled, scrambling backward dramatically, and just like that, a patrol car that had been parked at the far end of the pier rolled forward, its lights flashing. Out stepped Sheriff Brody, a large, soft man whose uniform seemed a size too small. His face was a mask of bored authority, but his eyes darted nervously toward Trent, seeking approval. "Ma'am," Brody said, his voice a practiced drawl as he approached Cassie. "I witnessed that your animal just lunged at Mr. Finch. That's an unprovoked act of aggression. That's not what happened." Cassie protested, her heart sinking. "He threatened us. He stumbled on purpose." Wyatt stepped forward, his presence instantly changing the dynamics of the scene. "I saw the whole thing." "Sheriff," he said, his voice calm and level, "Mr. Finch instigated the event." The dog was reacting defensively. Sheriff Brody barely glanced at Wyatt, his gaze dismissive. "I saw what I saw, sir. We've had complaints. This animal is a public safety concern." He turned back to Cassie, pulling a folded document from his pocket. "Dr. Reed, you are hereby served. This is a lawsuit filed by Mr. Alistair Finch on behalf of his son and a temporary injunction. You are to keep this animal muzzled in public and confined to your property at all other times pending a court hearing to have it declared a dangerous animal." Cassie stared at the papers in disbelief. Her hands shook as she took them. This was a nightmare when she returned to the clinic, shell-shocked. The final blow was waiting for her. A certified letter from the Washington State Veterinary Medical Board lay on her desk. Her hand, still trembling, tore it open. It was a formal notice of investigation into a claim of gross professional malpractice. The complainant was Eleanor Hayes. She claimed that Cassie's treatment had not only failed, but had resulted in the death of her beloved cat Luna. Just hours after she left the clinic, she was accusing Cassie of negligence and demanding the immediate suspension of her license. It was a perfectly coordinated, two-pronged attack designed to dismantle her life piece by piece. They weren't just trying to take her property anymore, they were trying to take her career, her reputation, and her best friend. She sank into a chair, the letter falling from her grasp, the weight of it all finally crushing her. Wyatt entered quietly behind her and picked up the letter. He read it, his expression hardening into granite. He placed it on the desk next to the lawsuit. "It's a frame-up, Cassie," he said softly. "A pincer movement. They hit you from two directions at once, hoping you'll break. How can I fight this?" she whispered, her voice raw with despair. "It's her word against mine. It's the sheriff's word against mine. They'll take Kodiak away from me. They'll take my license." Wyatt knelt in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. The calm in his eyes was a steady anchor in her storm of fear. "No, they won't," he said with absolute certainty, "because they made mistakes. The woman Eleanor Hayes used a PO box and paid in cash because she doesn't want to be traced. Trent and the sheriff staged their little scene, but they didn't know they had a second witness. We're not going to defend. We're going to attack." He pulled out his satellite phone. "My friends are already here now. They have a job to do." He dialed Deacon. He said, his voice dropping into a clipped military cadence. "I have 2 new targets for you, a woman named Eleanor Hayes. Find her. I want to know everything about her, and a Sheriff Brody. I want to know who butters his bread time to turn over some rocks." The storm that had been threatening for days finally arrived, hitting the Washington coast. With the force of a battering ram rain came down in near horizontal sheets, and the wind howled like a hungry wolf, turning the sea into a chaotic frenzy of gray and white. It was the kind of weather that sent sensible people indoors to the safety of a warm fire for Wyatt Nelson and his team. It was perfect cover. Wyatt drove his nondescript rental truck along a slick, winding coastal road, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge beside him. Cassie sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap in the back. Kodiak lay on a pile of blonde. Ketz, a solid, reassuring presence. They were headed for a place not found on any tourist map, the old derelict North Point cannery, a skeleton of rust and broken windows clinging to a remote stretch of coastline. "Are you sure about this?" Cassie asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. "It's the safest place to meet, Wyatt," said, his eyes fixed on the treacherous road. "No one's been out there in years. It's the last place anyone would look for us." He turned onto a muddy, overgrown track. The cannery emerged from the fog and rain like a ghost ship run aground, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust, its towering smokestack, a dark finger pointing at the angry sky. He parked the truck behind a crumbling seawall out of sight from the main road. As they ran through the rain toward a side entrance, the door creaked open before they reached it. A massive figure filled the doorway. Marco Gesta Rossi was built like the reinforced doors he was famous for breaking. His broad shoulders and thick arms were a testament to his role as the team's breacher, but his face, framed by a thick black beard, was split by a wide, welcoming grin. "Boss Doc, get in out of this mess." He boomed, his voice a cheerful rumble. He gave Kodiak an appreciative pat. "And this must be our VIP good boy." Inside the cavernous space was a maze of shadows and decaying machinery, but in a dry, sectioned-off office a different world existed. Two men were at work, the glow of their laptops and electronic equipment casting an eerie blue light on their faces. David Deacon Chen was a stark contrast to Jester, slender and wiry. He sat hunched over a bank of monitors, his fingers flying across a keyboard. His focus was so absolute it was as if the storm, the decaying building, and even their arrival didn't exist. He was the team's digital ghost, the one who moved through the invisible world of data and signals. The third man, Liam Spector Gallagher, was the team sniper in Overwatch, lean and patient with pale blue eyes that seemed to see everything. He was cleaning a long-range rifle with meticulous care. He acknowledged their entry with a short, sharp nod. His movements economical and precise report. Wyatt said, shaking the he rain from his jacket. Deacon spun his chair around his screen, showing a complex web of information, targets confirmed and analyzed. He said, his voice clipped and efficient. Eleanor Hayes is a professional con artist. Real name is Irina Petrova. She has a long history as a corporate courier specializing in creating legal and social distractions. She's been on Alistair Finch's payroll for the last 5 years. He clicked a key and a new file appeared. Sheriff Brody. Financials show a series of anonymous cash deposits into an offshore account starting 6 months ago. The deposits match the timeline of Aegis Development's major acquisitions. He's not just corrupt, he's wholly owned. Cassie listened, a cold nod of validation and fear tightening in her stomach. Everything she had suspected was true. It gets better. Deacon continued, I piggybacked, trace on Finch's encrypted communications. He's not just laundering money, he's moving product. A secure speaker on the table crackled to life, defined product. Deacon, the voice of Commander Vance, cut through clear and authoritative, patched in from a command center hundreds of miles away. Precursor chemicals, Commander Deacon answered, high grade, used in the manufacture of synthetic narcotics. A major shipment is scheduled to arrive tomorrow night under the cover of this storm. It's coming in on a repurposed fishing trawler called the Storm Tide. It will offload at the Aegis construction site, disguised as a late-night delivery of building materials. This was it. The smoking gun. This is our one shot. Vance's voice filled the room. We catch him with the shipment, and we can dismantle his entire U.S. operation. Wyatt, you're on the ground. What's the plan? All eyes turned to Wyatt. He walked over to a large dusty table and unrolled a satellite map of the construction site. Finch will be overconfident. Wyatt began, his finger tracing the perimeter. He thinks he owns the law here, and he's using the storm as cover. He'll have his own security, but they'll be focused on the water, watching for the Coast Guard, not for an attack from the land. He looked at Cassie. Cassie, you know this site better than any map. What are we not seeing? Cassie stepped forward, her initial intimidation giving way to a steely focus. She was no longer just a victim. She was part of the team. The main access road will be guarded, she said, pointing. But here, this is an old drainage culvert. culvert. It runs from the woods right under the perimeter fence and comes out behind the main warehouse they're building. It's not on any of the new construction plans. My dad and I used to explore it as a kid. It'll be muddy tight, but it's a blind spot. A slow grin spread across Jester's face. A blind spot? I love it. Perfect. Wyatt said, a look of respect in his eyes. That's our infiltration point. He laid out the plan, his voice calm and precise. It's a two-phase operation. Phase 1, Spectre. You'll take up an overwatch position on the ridge overlooking the site. You are our eyes and ears, Jester. You and the rest of the team will handle the perimeter guard, silent. Takedowns, no alarms, Deacon. You will be our digital overwatch, jamming their comms and looping their security feeds the second we move in. He then looked at his men, his gaze hard as steel. Phase 2, I will lead a two-man team through the culvert. We hit the warehouse directly during the offload. We secure the evidence, and the primary target, Alistair Finch, we catch him. Red-handed, this mission isn't sanctioned. Vance's voice reminded them all, capture and contain is the objective. You are ghosts. You secure the evidence, neutralize the threat, and hand over the package to federal assets I will have on standby miles away. You are not to be seen, understood. Wyatt said the plan was set. It was simple, audacious, and incredibly dangerous as the team began their final prepare. Rations. Wyatt walked over to Cassie. The storm raged outside, but inside the crumbling walls of the old cannery, there was a quiet, determined calm. You did good, Cassie, he said. That culvert, that's the key. Just be careful. She whispered, her eyes full of a fear she was trying hard to conceal. All of you. He handed her a small, rugged radio. Keep this with you, Jester, and 2 others will be staying here with you and Kodiak. This place is secure if anything happens, if anything at all feels wrong. You use this. We'll hear you. She took it, her fingers brushing against his. In that brief touch, an unspoken promise was made. This was for more than just a mission. It was for the quiet town they now fought to protect, for the clinic her father had built, and for the future they both hoped to see when the storm finally broke. The world outside the Aegis construction site had dissolved into a maelstrom of wind, and water rain hammered against the corrugated metal of the half-finished warehouse, the noise a deafening, rhythmic drum beat that served as the perfect soundtrack for the ghosts who were about to move through the darkness on the ridge overlooking the compound. Liam Spectre Gallagher was a statue carved from the night, wrapped in a ghillie suit. He was all but invisible, the powerful scope of his rifle piercing the stormy gloom through the lens. He was the operation's silent god, watching every move. Below Spectre is in position. He murmured into his throat. Mike, his voice, a calm whisper. I have eyes on 5 perimeter guards, all sloppy, more concerned with the rain than their sectors miles away. Yet everywhere at once, Deacon's fingers danced across his keyboard. Digital Overwatch is green, their comms are ours. Security cameras are on a clean loop as far as their monitors are concerned. It's just another rainy night. You are invisible. Go Phantom at the edge of the forest. Jester gave a thumbs up to his 2-man team. They melted into the shadows, moving with a brutal, silent grace toward their designated target. There were no gunshots, only the soft thud of suppressed air pistols and the heavy slump of bodies being dragged out of sight. In under 3 minutes, the perimeter was neutralized. Wyatt stood at the mouth of the drainage culvert. Cassie had described the stench of damp earth and decay thick in the air. Beside him, another SEAL, a young breacher named Rook, checked his gear. You ready for this? Wyatt asked, his voice low-born. In the mud, boss? Rook grinned. They plunged into the oppressive darkness of the pipe. It was a tight squeeze, the cold, muddy water soaking through their gear. The only sounds were their own ragged breaths and the scraping of their equipment against the concrete. It felt like being buried alive, a primal test of nerve that separated trained operators from ordinary men. Just as they neared the exit grate, Wyatt's comms crackled with a voice he didn't want to hear. It was Jester, his tone stripped of its usual cheer, replaced by a tense urgency. Jester to Ghost, we have a problem. The safe house is compromised. Wyatt froze, his hand raised to halt. Rook report, a Finch patrol vehicle stumbled on our truck. They didn't see us, but they're sweeping the area. This position is burned. I'm evacuating the doctor and our VIP, now moving to secondary extraction point. A cold dread washed over Wyatt. The plan had just fractured. Cassie was in motion out in the storm. What's your route? Following the old logging trail north, it skirts the western edge of your target site. It's our only way out without hitting the main road. The western edge too close, far too close, understood. Wyatt said, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. Stay dark, we are proceeding with the primary objective, Ghost Out. He pushed the grate, it lifted with a low groan, opening into the heart of the enemy's camp. They emerged behind the massive skeletal frame of the main warehouse, shielded from view by stacks of building materials. The scene was exactly as intelligence had predicted. The fishing trawler, the Storm Tide, was Yamxiao, moored at the temporary dock, its engines rumbling under the harsh glare of portable floodlights. A crew of rough-looking men were using a crane to offload large unmarked crates, and there standing under a canvas awning keeping himself dry was Alistair Finch. He wasn't Anton Vostok. Tonight he was a legitimate businessman, pointing and directing his men. His face illuminated by the lights, a portrait of calm corporate evil. Beside him stood a tall, imposing figure in a long black coat. This was a man Wyatt's gut instantly recognized as the true threat. He was lean with the dead-eyed stillness of a predator specter. Identify target with Finch. Wyatt whispered. That's Mikhail Spector's voice came back. Vostok's right hand from the old days, former Spetsnaz, he's the enforcer. The real one. The final crate was being lowered onto a flatbed truck when Wyatt heard it. A faint sound, almost lost in the storm, a dog's bark. His head snapped towards the western fence line. Jester's evacuation had gone wrong, trying to navigate the muddy trail. In the dark they had been spotted. Mikhail Finch's enforcer had seen them, his instincts screaming that something was amiss. He had left Finch's side, moving to intercept. Wyatt saw the confrontation unfold from 200 yards away. Jester was trying to pull Cassie back into the cover of the trees, but it was too late. Mikhail emerged from the shadows, a pistol in his hand, his movements fluid and deadly. The woman Finch shouted from the dock, realizing what was happening. Get me the woman. Mikhail didn't need to be told. He saw Cassie, and in her, he saw the perfect leverage, the ultimate shield. He lunged, ignoring Jester, his target the civilian, but he hadn't accounted for the VIP Kodiak, who had been held back by one of the other SEALs, exploded into action with a roar of pure protective fury. He launched himself through the air. He was not a pet. He was a guardian, a descendant of wolves, and his entire world was under attack. He hit Mikhail in the chest with the force of a freight tray. His jaws snapping, driving the bigger man backward away from Cassie. The shot from Mikhail's pistol went wild, cracking harmlessly into the night. For Wyatt, time compressed the mission, the evidence Finch. It all became secondary. There was only Cassie, and the threat. Engage, he roared into the comms. It was the signal for chaos. Spector's rifle cracked from the ridge, taking out a guard near the crane. Jester and his team opened fire from the tree line. Rook laid down a hail of suppressing fire toward the men on the dock, but Wyatt was already moving. He sprinted across the open muddy ground, his weapon up his focus, absolute. He saw Mikhail throw the snarling dog off him, raising his pistol for a second. Clearer shot at Cassie. Wyatt didn't need to aim. He fired twice from the hip. A perfectly executed failure drill. 2 rounds hit Mikhail's center mass, the impact staggering him. The third found his head. The enforcer dropped like a stone. He reached Cassie's side, grabbing her arm and pulling her and Kodiak behind the cover of a large earth mover. "Are you okay?" he yelled over the gunfire. "Yes," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror and adrenaline, her hand buried in Kodiak's fur. The firefight was short and brutally one-sided. Finch's hired guns were no match for a team of Navy SEALs. Within 60 seconds, the surviving security men had their hands in the air. Wyatt left Cassie with Jester and advanced on the dock. Alistair Finch stood frozen amidst the controlled pandemonium, his escape route gone, his best man lying dead in the mud. The look on his face was not fear, but sheer utter disbelief. He had controlled this town, this coast. He had been untouched. Wyatt stopped 10 feet from him, his rifle leveled at Finch's chest. The storm raged around them, but in the space between the two men, there was a dead, cold calm. "It's over, Vostok," Wyatt said, the name hitting Finch like a physical blow. The Empire had fallen. The ghost had been caught. The storm broke just before dawn. The wind died to a whisper, and the torrential rain softened into a gentle cleansing drizzle. As the first light of morning touched the horizon, it revealed a world washed clean, the air crisp with the scent of wet pine and the promise of a day scrubbed new at the Aegis construction site. The chaos of the night had been replaced by a cold, quiet efficiency. The members of Phantom Team had already melted back into the shadows from which they came, leaving behind Finch's men bound and secured. Before the first fishing boats had even left the harbor, a fleet of unmarked black vehicles had arrived, disgorging a team of federal agents who took control of the scene. With practiced authority, Alistair Finch, his face a mask of stone-cold fury, was placed in the back of one of them, his reign over the small coastal town ending not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a car door. By the time the sun had fully risen, Port Blossom was stirring, waking up to a reality that had been reshaped while they slept. The construction site was cordoned off with yellow tape. The FBI's presence, a stark and shocking confirmation of the rumors that were already spreading like wildfire. Sheriff Brody's patrol car was gone from its usual spot, and a federal officer now stood guard at the door to the small station. The corrupt lawman had been taken into custody an hour before dawn, his complicity laid bare by the evidence Deacon had compiled at the Pierview Diner. Silas Croft poured coffee with a steady hand, but his old eyes missed nothing. The place was buzzing, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and a palpable sense of liberation filling the air. Heard they took him out in handcuffs. One fisherman said, his voice low. Finch, the whole crew, and Brody another added about time, always knew there was something rotten about that man. Silas just nodded, his gaze drifting to the window. He saw them then walking down the street toward the beach, Wyatt Nelson, Dr. Reed, and her big German shepherd. They moved with a quiet purpose, a small island of calm in the town's sea of confuse. Ion and Silas, who had seen 70 years of storms come and go, understood the real storm was over while it stood on the wet sand, the tide pulling gently at his boots. The sea was calm now, its surface like hammered silver under the morning light beside him. Cassie watched Kodiak chase the retreating waves, a joyful, boundless explosion of energy. The dog was free, unburdened by the threats that had loomed over him. So were they. Wyatt's satellite phone rang. It was Vance's ghost report. The commander's voice was as steady as ever. Packages delivered. Wyatt said, "Federal assets have control of the scene and the primary target. The package is extensive, more than we thought. I've seen the initial manifest." Vance said, "You and your team just decapitated a major international smuggling route." The brass is pleased in a completely unofficial, unrecorded way, of course. There was a rare hint of dry humor in his voice. "What about my team? Phantom is already back at base, drinking my coffee and complaining about the mud. No casualties, no traces. A clean operation." Vance paused. "Your 30-day leave has been administratively reviewed. It's been extended indefinitely. Take as much time as you need, Wyatt." That's an order. It was the highest praise Vance could give, a quiet acknowledgement of a job well done and the freedom to choose what came next. "Understood," Commander Wyatt said. "Thank you, don't thank me," Vance replied. "Just try to stay out of trouble." The line went dead. Wyatt slipped the phone into his pocket. He was a soldier on indefinite leave, a man without a mission for the first time in his adult life. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like peace. He turned to Cassie. The exhaustion of the past week was still etched on her face, but for the first time her eyes were clear of the fear that had haunted them. They were filled with a quiet, profound gratitude. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now you get your life back?" Wyatt said, "The federal case against Finch means every lawsuit he filed against you. You and Kodiak is meaningless. They're built on fraud. They'll be thrown out. As for Eleanor Hayes or Irina Petrova, she's in federal custody and she's ready to make a deal. Your license is safe, your home is safe, and Trent, he's a loose end," Wyatt said, without his father's power. "He's just a spoiled kid with a temper. He'll either be arrested as an accomplice or he'll run either way. He's no longer a threat to you." A wave of relief so powerful it was almost dizzying washed over her. It was truly over. She looked at Wyatt, at the man who had appeared in her life like a force of nature, a quiet storm who had driven back the darkness. "And what about you?" she asked, her voice catching slightly. "Your leave can't last forever." He looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon he had spent his life crossing, moving from one conflict to the next. He had been a ghost, a weapon honed for a singular purpose. But here in this small town with this resilient woman and her loyal dog, he had found something he hadn't even known he was searching for. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. "Maybe it can," he said, turning to meet her gaze. Commander's orders were to take as much time as I need. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Cassie's face, a sunrise all its own. She didn't need to ask what he meant. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't leaving. He was home. He reached out and took her hand, their fingers lacing together naturally, comfortably. Kodiak, sensing the shift, trotted back to them, nudging his head between them and looking up with happy, intelligent eyes. Together, the three of them began to walk down the beach away from the wreckage of the past and toward the promise of the morning sun. Wyatt Nelson had come to Port Blossom seeking solitude, a place to heal from the invisible wounds of war. He hadn't found solitude. He had found a family, and for the first time, he was walking not toward a battlefield, but toward a future. If this story have touched your heart, we invite you to join our community. Please share this Sage of Hope with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that lift the spirit and remind us of the good in the world. And in the comments below, let us join together in faith. Please type amen so we know we are all praying for one another. God bless you all. Amen.